Hello, everybody. It's been a crazy past few weeks with everything that's been going on in the world, including the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and I wanted to comment on some things that I noticed about how conservatives have responded to that. One of the first things that I saw on social media before they knew anything about who the shooter was, and to be frank, given how many holes there are in the official story, I still don't think we know who the shooter is, much less their political leanings. But that aside, one of the first things that I saw was that the right wing went to blame the left wing immediately and tried to paint the left as the source of violence in this country. And the truth is that the exact opposite is the case. On literally the same day, there was a Nazi who did a school shooting. Not too long ago, there was a MAGA supporter who killed Democratic lawmaker Melissa Hortman. After the Kirk shooting, there was a probable Trump supporter who did a mass shooting at a Mormon church. And a teenager murdered two girls, in part because they had made jokes about Charlie Kirk. So those are just anecdotes, but if we look at the stats, the same pattern is upheld. Left-wingers, they'll damage property and stuff, but the right wing is just much more violent against people. And that makes sense when you consider the basis of their ideology. Left-wingers are in one way or another about humanitarianism and egalitarianism, whereas right-wingers are about upholding authority and tradition, and that can incline them towards violence against those who challenge authority or traditions. The second thing that I noticed was how hypocritical the conservatives are in their response. So they've been claiming to be all about free speech, but in the wake of the assassination, they've moved to get people fired for criticizing Charlie Kirk and taken umbrage at people on the left for not living up to a standard that Charlie Kirk himself did not live up to. You can just look at his comments about George Floyd or his rooftop joke about the destruction of Gaza, for example. The third thing that I noticed was the selective empathy coming from conservatives. So the assassination absolutely rocked their world and brought many otherwise quiet social media lurkers out to the fore with megaphone in hand. But these same people were either silent about or were even cheering on the destruction of Gaza, the violation of due process for immigrants, or police brutality against people of color here in this country. And it's understandable that a conservative would feel particularly jarred by this, since it's easy to imagine Charlie Kirk as a sort of proxy for them, in part because he looks like them and he fits the conservative ideal. But the animus against Charlie Kirk was not there just because he held conservative views. It was because he monetized and contributed to the increasing political polarization in our society by rage baiting college students and hiding the clips where he got beat. He made a lot of money on creating politics as entertainment and espousing a message that lined up with the interests of his wealthy donors. Just think about what his incentive structure is for a minute, and it should be very easy to see why he was not an honest actor. But selective empathy is really harmful. First, because it comes across as incredibly disingenuous. When you publicly mourn about this but stay silent on other issues, what I hear is that violence is unacceptable to you unless it's against someone who doesn't look like you. And that's not a very good way to garner sympathy. Secondly, the political right has this ever-shrinking circle of acceptance. I think that some people get some sense of safety and security by conforming to conservative norms, since it bestows upon them a sense of value and perhaps even being better than, I'm one of the good ones. But over time, that circle shrinks, and you need to be closer and closer to the ideal in order to be accepted. I think a good example of this are Mormons, who are what I would call a sort of heterodox branch of Christianity. And, plenty of them are really nice people, but they have some dubious beliefs, we'll just say. The people I argued with on social media about this were all Mormons, and they tend to be a pretty conservative lot. And I think that they want to see themselves at home with mainstream conservative culture. However, to the Christian nationalist base, which is largely composed of evangelicals, Mormons are not considered Christian. In the words of Pastor Mark Driscoll, who himself was invited onto the Charlie Kirk show the day after the attack by whoever runs the show now, it is a demonic cult. So it's only a matter of time before that circle shrinks and shuts them out. And unfortunately, I think this is what we saw with that senseless act of violence by an apparent Trump supporter against innocent people during a Mormon church service. If you really want to be safe and feel a sense of belonging with people in your community, whether or not you are in that proverbial circle now or not, you need to look out for the most vulnerable and make sure that they are safe, like the homeless, undocumented, the poor, people of color, and queer folks. Nobody is safe until we're all safe, because this attitude of looking away from injustice and cruelty as long as it doesn't affect you will eventually come around to bite you. And so that's the thing that I try to tell conservatives. Look, now you have a little taste of what it's like to be a black person and see people be indifferent to police killing innocent people who look like you, or to be a trans person and see people pile on hate while you are statistically more likely to be the victim of violent crime. So maybe you should keep up the same level of outrage and disgust when, for example, a Fox News host casually calls for the execution of homeless people who refuse treatment for their mental illness. Now, does it work? I don't know. I think it would be a gross oversimplification to say that people are conservative simply because they're bigoted, hateful, and selfish. I think people are very complicated, and how they form their views has a lot to do with upbringing and stuff like that. And I have my problems with the so-called woke mob, too. I don't think they always get everything right. So I don't want to do the stereotypical liberal leftist thing of saying, everyone who disagrees with me is evil. But there are a lot of people who just do not care about others, and because of that, they find conservative politics appealing. And so while there certainly are people who can be won over and convinced, there are some people who are just too far gone and are not worth spending time arguing with. This can be easier said than done in some cases, depending on your life circumstances, but I'd say ignore those people and stay away from them. You don't need their approval or recognition. They're not going to agree with you because for them, the cruelty is the point. Instead, it's better to get organized with people of goodwill who do care. If you get involved in your local left, you can be part of a lot of worthwhile projects that can do a lot of good for your community. So I myself have been able to participate in some mutual aid efforts that have helped get groceries and household supplies to low-income people in my community. So while it's a drop in the bucket, it's certainly going to do more to resist the tide of fascism than arguing with people who are too far gone on Facebook. So, at any rate, that was my rant. Thank you to everyone who listened this far. Hit like and leave a comment. It really makes my day. Until next time, this has been a Nerdy Tree production.